In the stillness of a Montana wilderness, just as the first snow began to fall, a woman named Grace Whitaker was building a life from scratch. One log, one nail, one breath at a time. Far from any town, Grace stood in a half-framed cabin, her body tired, her belly round with child, her hands blistered but steady. She had come west with nothing but grit and a wagon of borrowed supplies, determined to build a home before winter closed in. For weeks she had worked alone, unseen, unbothered, until the steady crunch of hooves broke the silence. At the edge of the tree line sat a man atop a bay gelding, broad-shouldered, calm-eyed, and respectful. "Didn't expect anyone out here," he said, tipping his hat. His name was Jesse Coulter, a widowed rancher from Circle C 10 miles north. Grace met his gaze without flinching. "This land is mine. If you're lost, head west. There's nothing for you here." But Jesse wasn't lost. He saw something in Grace, a woman refusing to fall, building something real in a world eager to overlook her. And though she bristled at the idea of charity, he offered something else entirely: respect. That moment, snow clinging to the pines, her hammer gripped tight. His horse, pawing the frozen earth, wasn't just a meeting of strangers. It was the beginning of something neither of them expected, the kind of connection that refuses to be buried even by the deepest snow. 3 days passed after Jesse Coulter first rode into Grace Whitaker's clearing. She hadn't expected to see him again. But that morning, just as frost clung like lace to the cabin frame and her breath steamed in the bitter air, she caught the sound of hooves again. Slow, steady, deliberate. She turned, hammer still in hand, as Jesse emerged from the trees. His coat was wool. His boots worn, and tucked in his arms was a checkered cloth bundle. "I know you didn't ask," he said gently, placing the bundle on a stump near the cabin. "But my mother sent some tea for nausea and a few things she knitted. She figured you'd act like you didn't need them, but send them anyway." Grace didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the bundle, then shifted to him. "You shouldn't have come," she said, though her voice lacked the sharpness it carried days earlier. "I figured I'd come anyway." He glanced at the cabin walls, at the uneven boards, the half-nailed frames, the woodpile stacked like a fortress against the coming cold. "You've done all this yourself?" he asked. She gave a curt nod. "Every nail." He let out a low whistle, not out of mockery but admiration. "That's impressive," he said, his gaze moving to her belly, then back to her calloused hands. "And painful, I'd guess." Grace folded her arms, bracing against both the wind and something warmer that crept under her skin. She hated how it felt, this unfamiliar pull toward someone who looked at her not with pity, but with clarity. "Why are you really here?" she asked, squinting into the pale sun. "Slumming for stories to tell your mama over supper." Jesse didn't flinch. "I came because I wanted to, because I don't like the thought of you doing this alone when it doesn't have to be that way. I'm not a charity case. I never said you were." Her voice sharpened. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. Men like you offer help like it's some kind of blessing, but it always comes with a cost, judgment, expectations, control." He didn't speak right away. He let her words sit in the air between them like cold breath. "Some people help," he said finally, his voice softer now, "not because they think you're weak, but because they admire your strength." That stopped her. For the first time, Grace truly looked at him. Jesse had the look of a man who'd grown up with comfort. His posture straight, his coat lined, but the fine lines around his eyes told another story. Loss, weariness, long days on horseback and nights without sleep. His hands, like hers, were worn, and his voice held none of the arrogance she'd learned to distrust. "I've seen a lot of folks fold under less than what you're carrying," he added. "But here you are, building something real with no one watching. That's not weakness. That's rare. Grace swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. She had heard flattery before, but this wasn't that. This was something else entirely: honesty. "I won't stay," he said, gesturing to the bundle. "Just figured you could use the tea. And maybe a reminder, not everyone who shows up is here to fix you or claim you." She glanced at the bundle again. Inside it was warmth she hadn't asked for, but maybe needed. "You can leave it there," she said at last. He nodded once, calm and steady. Then he turned back toward his horse. She watched him walk away, the sound of hooves fading into the forest. Only when he had disappeared did she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She stepped to the stump and unwrapped the bundle. Inside were 3 tiny knit garments, soft yellow wool stitched with care, and a tin of dried tea leaves that smelled faintly of ginger and mint. Her hands hovered over them. For the first time since arriving in Montana, something inside her cracked. Not enough to fall apart, just enough to feel. The days grew shorter. Wind curled beneath the cabin walls like a warning, rattling loose nails and whispering through the seams in the timber. Grace sat by the hearth, though calling it that was generous. The fireplace hadn't been finished yet, just a circle of stones and a shallow pit where flames struggled to hold. Her fingers were red from cold, from gripping lumber too long. She leaned over her knees, exhaling against the rising ache in her back. Jesse Coulter was there again, kneeling across from her, stacking the last of the firewood they had chopped that morning. Their hands had worked side by side for hours. No declarations, no unnecessary words. Just the rhythm of labor, the occasional muttered curse at a stubborn board, and the quiet understanding that settled in the space between them. "You hauled half a forest," Jesse said, wiping sawdust from his sleeves, "and you're half my size." Grace didn't smile. She stared into the embers, letting the flicker dance in her eyes. "I had to," she said simply. "Didn't have the luxury of waiting for someone to come save me." He sat beside her, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough to share the warmth. "I was married once," she said suddenly. Her voice didn't tremble, but it was quieter than usual, like she was pulling the words from somewhere buried. Boston, proper wedding, ivory gloves, fresh roses, candle-lit vows. Jesse said nothing, just waited. 6 months later, he walked out, said the child wasn't his, never even gave me the chance to speak. Her hands flexed on her lap, then stilled. I didn't tell him the truth. Didn't see the point. He was gone before I could even say the words. And the divorce. She scoffed. Never finalized. I left with unsigned papers and a belly full of fear, hoping he'd file them on his own. He didn't. Jesse turned his head slowly, his face unreadable. "So, legally, I'm still someone's wife, Grace," whispered eyes falling to the wooden floorboards. "Not that I lead with that information. Folks already look at me like damaged goods. That just seals the label." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop of sap in the fire. Finally, Jesse spoke, his voice low. "That's a hell of a weight to carry." She nodded barely. "You haven't asked the obvious question," she said, her tone sharpening slightly. "What's that?" "If I still love him." "I figured if you did," he said, "you wouldn't be here." Grace blinked, taken off guard. She looked at him fully, then really looked. His face was calm, without judgment. He didn't flinch or press, just let her be. "What about you?" she asked. "You don't seem like the type to ride alone just for the peace and quiet." Jesse looked out through the cabin's open doorway. Snow dusted the ridgeline in the distance. His jaw shifted once, then stilled. "Her name was Caroline, my wife. We married too young, maybe, but I loved her. She liked to race horses, said it made her feel free." Grace's stomach tightened. She took a gelding too fast one morning. Jessie continued and broke her neck on the ridge east of the ranch. I found her myself. I was 28. Grace drew in a sharp breath, pain blooming behind her ribs at the quiet heartbreak in his voice. That was 5 winters ago, he said. Since then, I mend fences, break ice in the troughs, keep to myself. Not because I'm afraid to love again. Just didn't see the point. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. So am I, Jessie said, but I'm still here, and so are you. Outside, wind howled through the trees. Inside, they worked the rest of the afternoon without speaking about what had passed between them. Grace measured planks for the doorway. Jessie sawed beams for the roof. Their hands moved with a kind of rhythm that neither wanted to acknowledge aloud, afraid that naming it might shatter whatever fragile understanding had formed. By dusk, they sat again, this time on the porch frame, their backs aching, their gloves stiff with resin and dirt. The sky was painted in streaks of lavender and steel. Jessie offered his coat. Grace refused. But after a moment, she spoke quietly, almost to herself. It feels safer to do everything alone, but maybe it's just lonelier. Jessie didn't answer right away. He looked at her, not with pity, not with possession, but with something steadier, kinder. Maybe, he said, and for that one moment, the wind passed softly through the timber walls, as if even the wilderness had decided to let them breathe. Winter crept in early that year, and so did the whispers. By the time frost glazed the prairie grass and the first snow stuck to the pine needles like lace, the town of Willow Ridge had begun to talk. Grace heard it in the tightening smiles at the general store and the way the clerk handed her flour without making eye contact. Even the Kowalskis, who had once delivered supplies with warmth and joke, now asked their questions with clipped politeness. It wasn't hard to guess why. Jessie Coulter had been seen too many times heading south, too many rides into the wilderness, too many visits that ended only when stars took the sky. Folks wondered, gossiped. A rancher's son lingering near a woman who wore her shame like armor and lived too far from decent company. It didn't matter that Grace had built her cabin with her own hands or that Jessie hadn't stayed overnight. In their minds, she was trouble. Worse, she was visible. So, when the carriage arrived, she wasn't surprised, only tired. The wheels crunched over frozen ground. The horses were fine-boned and too well fed. Grace wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out to the porch, just as the woman descended gloved in lambskin coat, stitched from imported wool, her chin held with the precision of someone used to get in her way. "Miss Whitaker," the woman said crisply, eyes scanning the raw wood porch and sawdust at Grace's feet. "I am Margaret Alden. Perhaps you've heard the name." Grace placed a protective hand over her swollen belly. "I have. Then I'll be brief." Margaret's eyes narrowed with distaste. "Whatever arrangement you have with Jessie Coulter, it ends now." Grace didn't flinch. "There is no arrangement." "Then end the association," Margaret said, stepping forward. "He visits. People talk. His family's name is being dragged through every parlor from Willow Ridge to Helena. My fiancé is hesitating to set a wedding date because he wonders if Jessie's fathering someone else's child." "He's a free man," Grace replied, voice steady, despite the pounding in her chest. "I've never asked him to stay, and I certainly haven't asked him for his name or his money." "No," Margaret said coolly. "Just his time, his reputation, his decency." Grace's jaw clenched. "I built this place alone, split my own wood, sewed clothes for a child who may never know anything but pine wind and snowfall. I've asked for nothing, and yet you've come. Because your silence lets the town imagine the worst," Margaret snapped. "Because your presence, this defiance, is haunting him. And while you stand out here pretending to be noble, you're destroying the future Jessie was raised for." Grace took a breath. Her palms dug into her skirt. "You don't own him," Margaret smiled tightly. "But I understand how this world works. Men fall in love with struggle, they romanticize pain if it's wrapped in strength. But they marry what's safe, what's respectable. That will never be you." The words landed like slaps. "I suggest you leave," Margaret continued, stepping back toward the carriage. "Sell this land. Go east. Vanish into some town where no one knows you were the scandal that nearly ruined a ranching legacy." Then she turned, climbed into the carriage, and left without another glance. Grace stood there long after the wheels vanished into the pines. The cold sliced through her shawl. Her heart ached in places even hammer swings hadn't reached. Eventually, she stacked the logs Jesse had chopped last week, lit the fire, boiled the tea he'd left. The baby shifted low in her belly, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. But that night, staring out at the dark, she whispered to no one, "Am I destroying the only good man who's ever looked at me without pity?" The question didn't leave her. It followed her with every footstep in the snow, with every board she hammered into place, with every moment Jesse didn't come. She braced herself for him to vanish like the rest, for him to walk away under the weight of what the town expected. But when he came back, he didn't knock. He opened the door like he belonged there. Snow clung to his shoulders. Blood had crusted on his shirt collar. His cheeks were red from cold and resolve. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, voice cracking. "I should be exactly here," Jesse said, stepping into the warmth. "Because I'm done living a life built for other people. I told my father the engagement is off. Margaret can keep her title. I'm not marrying a woman I don't love just to make peace with a town that doesn't understand truth." Grace's knees nearly buckled. "You'd throw it all away?" she asked. "For this, I'm not throwing anything away," he said. "I'm building something real with you." And in that moment, between cold air firelight and everything unspoken, Grace felt the walls she'd built begin to tremble. Not from weakness, but because they were finally being met with something stronger, love that didn't ask her to be less. The storm came in heavy that night, sheets of snow falling like silence made visible. Grace Whitaker sat near the fire, hands wrapped around a tin mug, long gone cold. The wind howled through the gaps in the unfinished walls, but inside the cabin was still. Since Margaret Alden's visit, Grace had waited for Jesse to return, not with hope, but with dread. She braced for him to arrive angry or ashamed to say the things she feared most. "This can't go on. I have a future to protect. You don't fit in it." But when the hoofbeats came steady and familiar, none of those words followed. She opened the door before he could knock. Jesse stood in the falling snow shoulders, dusted white breath curling in the cold. His jaw was set, not in defiance, but in quiet decision. "Grace," he said, voice low, "I need to talk to you." She stepped aside without a word. Inside the fire, threw soft light across the log walls. Jesse removed his gloves with deliberate care, then turned toward her. His eyes didn't waver. "I went home," he began. "Told my father the engagement was over. Told him I wouldn't marry Margaret. Told him I wouldn't build a life I didn't believe in." Grace's heart thudded. "And what did he say?" "He called me a fool. Threatened to cut me off from the ranch, from the inheritance. Said I was ruining everything he built." She opened her mouth, but he raised a hand gently. "I'm not telling you this to impress you," he said. "I'm telling you because you need to understand this isn't about pity. This isn't rebellion. It's not some fleeting feeling I'll walk away from. This is me choosing what's real." He stepped closer. "You. This place. That child. I've seen more truth in the way you hold a hammer than I've seen in every fancy ballroom conversation of my life." Grace turned her face toward the fire, eyes burning. "There's something you don't know," she whispered. "Something I should have told you sooner." Jesse waited. "I'm not divorced. Not legally. I left Boston with the paperwork half done, thinking Charles would sign and send it through. He never did. I didn't have the strength to chase it. I just wanted to disappear." She faced him now, voice trembling. "I'm not free. I'm someone else's wife, at least in the eyes of the law. And you deserve to know that before you throw away your future for someone who can't give you anything in return." The confession landed heavy in the room, like snowfall too thick on a brittle roof. Jesse didn't flinch. He stepped forward and reached for her hands. Rough, red, cracked from labor. Hands that had built a home and carried a child without help. "You think that changes how I feel?" he asked softly. She tried to pull away. He held fast, firm, not forceful. "It only makes me want to fight harder for you." Her breath hitched. "I've seen what you've carried," he continued. "I've watched you build this place with nothing but grit and bone-deep resolve. That's not weakness, Grace. That's strength. And I admire the hell out of it. I have nothing to offer you," she whispered. "No name, no wedding, just this cold night's broken laws, a child born into silence. You offered me the truth," he said. "You offered me something real. That's more than I ever got from anyone else." She looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time she didn't see pity. She saw love, raw and quiet, the kind that stays when everything else walks away. The fire popped behind them. Wind rattled the shutters. But in the stillness between their breathing, something settled. "A promise. I've built so many walls," she murmured. "I forgot where the door is." Jesse leaned his forehead gently to hers. His voice cracked. "Then let me help you find it." For a long moment, the world outside vanished. The snow, the town, the names they'd been called, it all disappeared. "I lost Caroline without warning," Jesse said, voice thick with memory. "One moment, she was laughing about my coffee being too strong the next. She was gone. I buried her under a cottonwood tree and never believed in anything again." Grace touched his cheek, hesitant at first, then steadier. "You think I'm going to leave?" he asked. "Not after everything I walked away from. Not when I finally found something worth keeping." And for the first time in years, Grace let the weight in her chest shift, not vanish, but lighten. Not carried alone, but together. They didn't speak of rings, or vows, or futures carved by society's hand. Only of what was real. Only of what was here. Outside, snow kept falling. But inside the cabin, love had begun to take root, quiet, patient, undeniable. And this time, Grace Whitaker knew she wasn't standing alone. The storm came in with no warning, just a shift in the sky, the air thick with stillness, then snow sudden and blinding. By early afternoon, the world outside Grace's cabin had turned to white. The wind howled across the plains like it had teeth. Snow slapped the windows, forced its way through the cracks in the unfinished walls. Grace gripped the porch railing, her boots planted in ankle-deep drift, her belly heavy and tight with the weight of a child too close to arriving. The baby had been restless since dawn. Low kicks, sharp jabs, as if it too sensed what was coming. Inside, she moved with practiced urgency. Lit every lamp, boiled water, laid towels near the fire. She whispered to herself as she worked, not out of fear, but to keep from panicking. She had done hard things before, but not this, not alone. Then it hit, a contraction, deep and sudden, tearing through her body like fire through canvas. She doubled over, clutching the table, her breath gone. The pain clawed through her spine and wrapped around her stomach like a belt pulled tight. "Not now," she gasped. Not like this. Miles away, Jesse Coulter stood at the edge of his barn, watching the sky turn white. He didn't wait for a message, didn't need a word. He knew. Something in the wind, a pull in his gut, louder than instinct, told him Grace needed him. Now, he saddled his best horse and rode into the blizzard. But the storm wasn't merciful. Visibility dropped to nothing. His horse stumbled on a hidden drift and went down hard, flinging him into a frozen creek. Ice swallowed him. Water stole his breath. Pain lanced his shoulder. For a moment, he didn't move, just lay there, snow settling on his lashes, lungs burning. "She needs me," he groaned aloud, dragging himself up from the icy bed. The horse was gone. The storm swallowed its tracks. So Jesse walked one step, then another, through waist-high snow and wind that screamed against his skin. Back at the cabin, Grace screamed into the firelight. She gripped the edge of the table, the pain coming faster now, closer together, no breath between the waves. Her body felt like it was splitting. Her cries echoed through the tiny space unanswered, but defiant. She called for strength, for mercy, for her father, long buried in the hills of Virginia, for someone, anyone. But no one came. And then, just as her vision blurred with pain and sweat and raw fear, the cabin filled with a sound that broke the storm, a cry. Small, beautiful, alive, a boy, her son. Grace fell back onto the floorboards, cradling the child against her chest, sobbing with relief and exhaustion, and something close to awe. She kissed his damp skin, whispered promises she had no idea how to keep. "I've got you," she breathed, "even if it's just me. I've got you." She didn't know how much time passed. The fire burned low. The baby drifted into sleep. Snow battered the windows. The cold crept closer, and then a knock. Faint at first, then louder, firmer. She froze. The door opened. Jesse stood there, soaked in snowblood on his shirt, his face pale with pain. His eyes locked on hers. "Jesse," she gasped. He stumbled inside and dropped to his knees near the fire. Steam rose from his coat. His breath came ragged. Then he saw the baby. Their eyes met across the firelight. No words, only his hand, trembling slow, reaching forward to touch the tiny fist resting against her chest. "Well," he murmured, voice hoarse, "looks like you already built a family, Miss Whitaker." Her throat closed. She could have said no, could have told him to leave, that it was too much, too fast, too soon. But she didn't. Instead, she shifted the baby into his arms. "Only if you're sure," she whispered. Jesse looked down at the child, then back at her. His voice was steadier now, warmed by something deeper than fire. "I've never been more sure." The storm still raged outside, but inside the cabin, something else had taken root. Something no wind could break. Not pity, not obligation, a promise. Grace leaned back, exhausted, but no longer alone. Jesse sat beside her, cradling the child as if he'd always been meant to. She rested her head on his shoulder, her breath finally slowing. Outside, snow fell without mercy. But inside, a new kind of warmth held fast. It was the beginning of something they hadn't dared to dream, a home. The first sign of spring wasn't wildflowers or melting snow. It was the soft give of earth beneath Grace's boots. Mud clung to her worn soles as she stepped out from the cabin, the sun catching the curve of her shoulders as she carried a bucket in one hand, and her newborn son, Luke, swaddled tight against her chest in a linen sling. The air still bit with traces of winter, but there was warmth beneath it, a promise. "Feels early for soft soil," Jesse called from near the fence line. He was driving a post into the ground shirt, rolled at the sleeve sawdust on his forearms, and that same lopsided grin she had come to know by heart. "Or maybe the land just knows we've got work to do," she replied, smiling back. He stood and dusted off his hands. Either way, we're gonna need more space. That boy's growing fast." They had named him Luke. No fanfare, no Bible verses or family legacy, just something strong, steady, simple. Like them. Inside, the cabin had changed. The fire still burned, but the warmth came from more than flames. It came from laughter, from Jesse's boots by the door, from the way Grace hummed while hanging linens, from the rhythm of two people who had once known only silence, now learning to breathe again. That afternoon, Grace sat at the table and penned a letter to a Boston law office, the official request for divorce. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed it. Grace Whitaker, formerly Charles's wife, no longer anyone's property. She sealed the envelope, pressed wax to the flap, and exhaled. Jesse stepped inside a moment later, sun on his cheeks and a few shavings of cedar caught in his hair. He saw the letter and paused. "You did it." She nodded. Last piece of the past, gone. He kissed her forehead fingers, brushing her jaw. "I'm proud of you." They didn't celebrate with rings or a preacher. There were no white dresses or church bells. Instead, there was a supper. The Kowalskis brought bread. A couple neighbors brought their children. Grace made stew. Jesse hung lanterns. When the sky turned lavender and the prairie hushed beneath dusk, Jesse stood from the porch steps and reached for her hand. "She's the strongest woman I've ever known," he said, voice steady but thick. "I thought I came here to help her, but truth is, she saved me." Grace looked at him, her smile soft. "No rings," she said, "but plenty of roots." They toasted with tin cups and coffee. No one asked for documents. Out here, love wasn't proven by signatures, it was proven in firewood and roof beams and babies held close through long nights. A week later, Grace stepped outside and found Jesse finishing the new kitchen door. She'd asked him earlier what he was working on, and he'd just said, "You'll see." Now she did. He'd crafted the handle from a bent horseshoe, sanded and shaped smooth. Bolted it into the frame like it belonged there. "Found it near the pasture," he said. "Thought it was scrap. Turns out it just needed shaping." She ran her fingers over the curve, then looked at him. "Like some people." He nodded. "Broken things can still carry weight if they're strong enough." The days stretched longer. Wildflowers bloomed along the creek bed. Luke learned to laugh. And one golden evening, Grace sat at her father's old writing desk and pulled out a piece of worn blue stationery. She wrote, "Dear P, you said once that a home isn't a place, it's a feeling. I didn't believe you then, but now I do. I built a cabin, hauled lumber, nailed roofs, fought storms. I did it for me and my boy. But it took a quiet cowboy with dusk in his eyes and a heart like yours to make it feel like home. We're not alone anymore. Love, Grace." She folded the letter, placed it in her father's old tin mailbox, and stepped outside just as Jesse looked up from mending the fence. Luke gurgled in her arms. Her heart felt full in a way she never expected to feel again. The wind carried the scent of pine and new growth of earth beginning again. Spring had come, and with it, everything she'd never dared to dream. In the heart of the Montana wilderness, Grace Whitaker didn't find love, she built it. With each nail driven into raw timber each silent night beside a growing child, and every fear she swallowed to keep going, she carved a life not of perfection, but of truth. Jesse Coulter didn't save her, he saw her. Not as someone broken, but as someone who had survived. Together, they didn't chase fairy tales. They chose one another in the mud, the snow, the silence. And that made all the difference. No rings, no rules, just roots deep and real. Life lesson. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with roses or promises. It shows up in the form of someone willing to stay, to listen, to carry the weight with you, not because you need saving, but because you deserve not to carry it alone. In a world that praises perfection, this story reminds us real love is built, not found. We'd love to hear from you. Did Grace and Jesse's story remind you of someone in your life? Have you ever found love in the quiet moments, not the grand ones? Share your thoughts below. Your comment could be the voice someone else needed today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here at Wild West Love Stories. Because out here, the bullets may miss, but the heart never does.